We got a lot.
All right. To Senate Judiciary, continuing our work on the Women's Correctional Facilities portion of the capital bill. And, we have a redraft of section 26 of the capital bill. And Damian Leonard is here from Legislative Council to walk us through this new version, and then we'll hear from the corrections people and any others. And we're going to continue the conversation about the women's prison in terms of size, etc. Probably do that in the miscellaneous corrections bill.
Okay. Great. For the record, I'm Damian Leonard from Legislative Council. So the draft in front of you, I think on your draft, the highlighting is in light gray. But that'll just show you where we've made changes from the underlying section 26. And I'll apologize, this is drafted as an amendment as if you had custody of the bill.
Right.
That was just
give it to Senator Ing.
Yeah, that was just me rushing through my amendments there. So in subsection B of the section, I changed the lead-in language a little bit, so you'll see that we've added the words evaluate and identify in different spots here, just to clarify what we're asking for. And the main addition is the new subdivision 3 on the bottom of page 2, which provides that if the existing facility cannot be repurposed as a reentry facility and a new reentry facility cannot be constructed on the site, identify other potential sites for a male reentry facility that are near support services, programming, and work opportunities needed to facilitate successful reentry into the community. So I made that consistent with other language in the bill relating to location of reentry facilities to just to be clear that you would want this located near those supports and services as well, rather than, you know, someplace that's far away from the things needed. So, pretty straightforward from the drafting on. Are there any questions?
Just a quick question, and this might be one for DFC, but do we have a definition of reentry facility anywhere? Because I just want to make sure that, you know, if we are trying to create a actual reentry facility, that it's not just another prison that we're calling a reentry facility.
There is not a definition of reentry facility in the capital bill. I'm not sure about within the larger correction statutes. I could certainly find out, but the commissioner may know.
Yeah,
Thank you.
hi there, Isaac Gino, policy director.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Policy director,
Happy to
sorry.
pinch it for the commissioner. He's upstairs with
Yeah.
Chair Evans. No, the legislative council is correct. There's no, I don't think there's any statutory definition of a reentry facility. There are federal reentry facilities. Notably, I believe Senator Walsh has been very vocal in U.S. Senate Judiciary about Vermont's lack of a federal reentry center. That's through the Bureau of Prisons at the federal level. Those look a little different. We, as a department, when we say reentry facility, we mean it in the sense of the main model, which has a reentry facility, which is minimum security. That facility has no external fence. There are, the doors are open. Women have come and go. They have jobs in the community. They can see family. That is sort of what we are envisioning for a women's reentry facility. So I think the idea would be we would want to create parity with the men and have a similar facility. Currently, of course, we have 5 male facilities. None of them have a reentry facility.
Thank you.
Well,
That's helpful.
should we include the language, something there based upon the main model?
I definitely think it makes sense to define it. Like, I certainly appreciate that that's DOC's intent and commissioners change and value. So I think it does make sense to put in statute what we mean when we say reentry facility and really lay out that it is minimum security with an aim at transition back to full community participation, including, work opportunity, family visitation opportunity, etc.
I think, if there's a way that we can look at, how Maine defines it, if we want to stick with the main model and maybe put some of those definitions in. I think that could be helpful, if that's something that might work.
Yeah, I'm looking right now at the main statutes, just to see if I can find a definition. I've certainly found their Department of Corrections website on services for successful reentry, where they talk in more detail about, developing a reentry plan, for a resident once they're within 9 months of their earliest release date, and focusing on housing and employment, and then talking about work with case managers, et cetera, but doesn't boil down to easy statutory language at first glance. But let me see if they have something in their correction statute that might work. So they have reentry houses. I don't know that that is actually looking at. Okay. So they do provide, in their standards, policies, and procedures applicable to jails, that each jail shall provide substance use screening, assessment, medication, treatment, recovery, and reentry services, including at a minimum reentry planning and transitional support, such as coordination with community-based treatment and case management service providers and recovery organizations to ensure reentry and continuity of care after release, including appointments for services made prior to release. And then, as well as assistance in obtaining health insurance prior to release. Again, it's not a facility definition, but it does define some of the services provided. Might make sense for me to work with our DOC to sort of finesse that into a clear definition. Just looking back at the other language I've got here. So there's only 3 instances in their correction statutes where reentry appears. The first is, the first relates to substance use disorder treatment. The second is in that standards and policies for jails. And then the third is in the section entitled reentry houses, and they define reentry house as a correctional program provided by the department through a written contract with a private employer to provide and maintain housing for specified prisoners, employ those prisoners, and provide all meals, laundry, and transportation. It is not a correctional facility. So it sounds like transitional housing after you exited the correctional facilities, but while you're still under DOC supervision.
I believe House Corrections and Institutions last year did put together a legislative letter of intent around the reentry facility and what that would look like. So I can track that down somewhere, but I believe there already is some language specifying what that should look like and its role should be. I think, I agree with Senator Polsky. I think, there is a lot of utility in creating that statutory framework. I also would caution, we would need a little bit of discretion just because it's still very much in development. I wouldn't want to over legislate, what that facility might look like.
Yeah, that was my next, curiosity is, it's putting too much in there could just slow the whole process down and just make it more difficult in general. But I do want to make sure there's at least some sort of guardrails or not guardrails, but just guidance as to what, the definition would be as it plays out.
Right, and I think enshrining those principles, is very helpful. I think, getting down to what the building looks like, I want to defer, of course, to the, Department of Buildings General Services, but certainly, we appreciate the ability to operate under those principles.
Yeah, and I can work with, also loop in Ben from our office, since he has more expertise in the actual correctional system and legislative drafting around that.
You could put it in intent language
Mm-hmm.
rather than in statute, that it's the intent of the legislature that the reentry facilities are based on the main model, and leave it at that without having any further description. And that way maybe you'd say current main model in case they change it.
Yeah.
But if you just do that as intent, then I think you cover the concern.
Yeah, I can, that's easy, just adding, another section here to the bill that would just say it's the intent of the General Assembly that the reentry facilities, for both, justice involved men and justice involved women shall be, designed and, based on, the model currently being utilized in Maine or something like that, or designed and developed.
I think one question, maybe a concern, is whether or not that would be a little too overbroad, because I if it's saying in the intent, follow the main model, what aspects of the main model, is it every single thing, or just the philosophy, or what? I think some specifics could be helpful for DOC.
Okay.
I don't know what your thoughts might be.
Senator Walsh.
Yeah, I certainly think having it in the intent section is better than not having it anywhere, though I do still have a preference for a bit more of a definition of what re-entry facility means. And I agree with Senator Hashim, and I think in some ways it may be too constrictive in that we may discover 5 years from now that there's an even better model than the main model. And so I want to make sure that we're really looking at what are the values that we have about this facility, not necessarily pointing to another model and saying it should look just like that. Because I think if we zoom out from this country, we would find that there are models that are in fact better than the main model that we that might be better defined through what are the values as opposed to what is the model it looks like.
Okay.
Just to make things more complicated for you.
That's all right. Thrive on complication.
Well, then we're gonna be good friends.
At least that's what I'll tell you. Yeah, okay. So what I can do is work with DOC and then come up with some intent language. And I'll look to the intent letter from last year.
Look at us putting in intent language.
Well, I'd like to see it more codified, but I'll settle.
Okay. When are they gonna vote out the capital?
Next week seems to be the latest that I've heard from the committee.
So if we schedule this next Tuesday, it'll be okay.
I think so.
Why don't we schedule it next Tuesday, Ben? Along with the other stuff that we talked about doing. Who did the miscellaneous bill? Ben Nowakowski or?
Yeah, Ben did miscellaneous corrections.
Our conversation about anything else on the women's prison would be in the miscellaneous corrections, but, size and et cetera. Although, can we discuss size this morning?
You can. Do you want me to
Still
go
not
to the chair?
understanding. I think there's a lot of confusion And I look at I'm assuming everybody got emails from the Network Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault today.
Mhm.
Right, I believe, I talked to the network yesterday, I believe they were submitting some written testimony kind of
Yes.
directly to the other.
And I think there's,
You want me to print out?
yeah, why don't you print out Sarah's memo?
The department and BGS are also both working on kind of a one pager, that'll go over the bed counts, but I think I can just speak a little bit to that. I think some of the confusion goes around a residential bed and a non-residential bed, which we touched on a little bit last time, but a bed that someone would live in versus a bed that someone is just temporarily in for short periods. For example, an acute mental health bed, an intake bed if someone's coming into the facility, some flexible space if you have to shut down a unit for door repair with, some kind of mechanical issue. But, happy to talk about that, and also how the reentry facility also kind of fits into that. So that one pager, I think, should help elucidate the issue.
The problem I have is the size of it. You don't wanna build it so small that it gets overwhelmed, but you don't wanna build it so big that it looks like you're gonna have vacant space. What's the most economical size?
Well, I think I'd ask, the BGS folks, but I know their core is the main driver of cost, so not the beds per se, but all the core functions.
Right. So core is the main driver of cost, and of course, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, always.
Join that
I'm sorry,
advice.
I didn't introduce myself. I'm Sabrina Carriage, I'm a project manager for BGS. And so core, which is the administrative space, the programming space, the vocational training space, the kitchen space, that is the main driver of the cost of a construction facility. Our facility is very small. We basically only have one type of each unit. And so, the number of beds we're talking about is such a small number that you're not really saving costs by cutting or lowering, because we still need the same number of units. We basically have one pod for your general population is where the majority of the people live. That's where the majority of your residential beds are. And we basically have one pod of each type, a medium and minimum. Corrections in Vermont doesn't do a traditional medium and minimum. So we don't have, basically, in a traditional medium, you would have a wet cell, which means you could lock individuals in a room. We don't do that with the women's population. So the medium and minimum pods are interchangeable. It's just a matter of, in medium, there's 2 locked doors, and in minimum, there's 1. And so if we were to transfer those units, we just simply unlock one of the doors, and it becomes a minimum unit. Otherwise, they have the same amenities. But we need, and so each unit has 2, each pod has 2 units, and we need 2 units of each one, because there's often, and corrections units, because there's often times where you need to separate someone with the same custody level, but they can't live together for, they may be in the same, related to the same case, or they may be related, or some other reason why they can't be together. So you need one of each unit. So we've hired an international firm that basically studies the operation of facilities to find what's most efficient. And right now, we are working with a 40-bed pod, and that is the most efficient size. If you get smaller, you can go smaller, but it's really just a matter of the space of the actual bed, not the core of the unit.
What's the name of the firm?
So HOK is the architecture firm, and then they have various consultants for different things. The main one is Hardy. I think it's just Hardy Consulting, and they're the kind of corrections operations consulting firm.
What was the size of the pod again?
So we're at 40 units. 40 beds, sorry.
40 beds
Yes.
per pod, and
Yes.
2 pods.
Yes, so we have 2 pods, and each of those pods is separated into 2 units, so 20 each
So
side.
there's 80 beds total
Yes, so that's your
And
general
then
population
for the
beds.
general population,
Yes.
which includes detention.
Yeah, that is detention, yes. Yes, that's your general population secure facility beds. The reentry would technically be considered general population as well, but that's on, that's basically a separate side. And so you don't necessarily want to go much larger than 40 beds, and you don't want to go much smaller, because then you get into staffing efficiency.
And then you have specialty beds.
Correct.
So that's 80 total beds for general.
And in each one of these units that we talk about, we want 15% of them to be empty at all times. And that's our operational.
Who came up with that idea?
The American Correctional Association,
Yes.
the ACA standard.
Yes, and there's actually, we call it the 85% rule. There's an 80% and an 85% rule. We've chosen to go with the 85% because our numbers are so small. The 20% is just too, we're not large enough for that. If you're in a larger state, they may go with the 80% rule. So we're going smaller than most larger states would
It's
go.
85% of 40.
And so there's always fluctuations.
What is 85%?
You want me to do the math for you, sir?
Yeah,
And
please.
so we're basically at about 100 people. So,
34.
So 34 beds,
right.
if you do that.
And
So
so-
then you've got 68 beds total for the general population.
And so our HOK was actually originally recommending 194 total beds, but we didn't feel, looking at historic data and the future plans with the reentry facility, we didn't feel that number was too large, we felt for our state.
So can we go through the rest of the beds?
Yes. So you have medium 40, minimum 40. We have honors housing, which is also a general population, that's 20 beds. And
What?
that is,
Honors unit, which is, we have two honors units, in Vermont. We have one at Springfield, and then we have another one at CRCF. Those are sort of specialty units, where there is no correctional officer on duty. They use restorative justice practices to resolve conflicts that come up in the unit. They check in and out as they please. They do their, all their own laundry. There's a lot of kind of communal activities. So we'd like to continue to create space for that in the replacement facility. Sort of more of a Scandinavian model.
And we also saw that in the main model as well. So for the record, my name is Jennifer Fitch. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Buildings and General Services. If you haven't had a chance to go to Maine, you absolutely should. But we also did have an opportunity, in addition to seeing reentry, to see their new honors housing that they've been doing for several years. But to Isaac's point, it is a community, and the community runs, that population within that unit. Very popular, something else that you'd really like there.
and that population is generally a longer term.
So that's 17 beds if I take off my 15. So you're gonna build, and is there any other beds?
Yeah, we have lots of different beds.
Well, let's go through.
All right.
Oh,
so then-
Senator Bowski had a question about the honors beds.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what you're describing is, in the honors unit, is really minimum security and much more akin to reentry. So
Right.
how is it different?
Well, I think, to Rita's point, part of it is the population is slightly different. We have some folks who are serving very lengthy sentences for pretty high profile violent crimes, not many, but a few. And so the way it's kind of designed in Maine is that you have to meet, I think it's 5 years until you reach, your release date to qualify for the reentry facility. We have some folks who, for example, I'm thinking a certain individual who won't be eligible for release until 2041. So for that individual, she wouldn't qualify for the reentry facility, so she's not within that time frame. But she's, I think a model member of the correctional facility, of that community. And so she's a kind of an anchor in the honors unit. There's a slightly different structure. Also one more thing, is that there's a kind of a major difference between our system and Maine system, is that we're a unified system. So Maine, everyone is sentenced on the first side.
Okay, so let's keep going with the number of beds.
Yep, so now we get into our specialty beds. So we have 8 close custody beds. I'll let you do the definition of each one. You want me to? Okay.
Closed custody,
Yes.
is that isolation?
There's more of a kind of restrictive housing.
So is that under the 85% rule too?
Yes. All of these are under the 85% rule. And then we have a long-term chronic medical. We have 5 beds there.
5 beds long-term medical?
Yes. Yeah, these are all special, yeah. Acute mental health, we have 5.
How many?
5.
5 mental
Yes.
health beds.
And then we have 4, what we call a flex unit, which is for whatever, DOC is often asked to house a population that doesn't fit in with the rest of their population for whatever reason, a juvenile, for instance, something like that. And so this unit would provide them a place that offers all of the same amenities as the other units while giving them the restriction they need.
Yeah, incapacitated persons, for example, who have not actually been charged with the crime, but have been found to be too much of a risk to hold in a hospital setting, and those people are sent to the Department of Corrections. Yeah.
Right now, you can talk about where they're held right now. Right now, we don't have a place to hold them, so they're often in a less than ideal situation.
Right, usually an intake.
Yeah. And then we get into infirmary, that's 4 beds, that's a requirement of the DOC regulation, for basically for the size facility for, infirmary beds. And those are temporary, you're only there if you need isolated medical attention. And then we get into our very, very short-term beds, our intake, which we have at 7, our incapacitated, which we call INCAP at 2, and then assessment at 10. These are beds we don't currently have at Chittenden. Right now at Chittenden, once you're at intake, you go directly to a housing unit. We've noticed a lot of issues with that. If you've never been in corrections before, you have no idea what to expect, you may be very scared. There's also a large number of things that need to be evaluated before you are placed in housing, and this is a temporary holding place to do those assessments, to figure out which housing unit an individual should be in, as well as make sure they receive all of any medical attention, any mental health attention they need, and create their plan for.
Is that 2 of the 7 or?
That's 10. This unit is 10, and I think there's a 7 to 10 day stay.
10 days for 10 beds for 7?
10 beds, yes.
That seems awfully high.
Assessment. Yeah. And so all of these numbers are based on historic data, and adding in that 15% on top of it. And that's the secure facility side. And then we get into the reentry, and we're building 30 beds on the reentry side. However, we're building the core because if our reentry model works, more individuals will be transitioning from the secure side to the reentry. So we're building the core large enough for a 30-bed addition in the future.
Serena, if I may go quickly, I think these numbers are still very provisional. We're still looking at site selection, working with towns, looking at permanent. There are many steps to go before we really solidify these numbers. One of the pieces that we've explored with our women's facility stakeholder group as well is that there would need to be statutory change to allow us to put detainees in a reentry facility. And so we'll be working with them on that for next session to that kind of language. However, particularly around the reentry facility, that 30-bed number, that I imagine if we get that statutory change through to allow detainees to be in that reentry setting, that number would go up. We would probably want to allocate more beds to the reentry facility.
So you're already at 150 beds by my count. And that seems like an awful lot of beds for women in this state. My opinion.
Well, we did, a few years ago, we were at 157 women incarcerated. That was 2018.
So again, I feel like the thing that I continue to hear is the concern is if we build it too large, we will fill the beds. I just want to be very clear, and I know that I'm out of my policy area because this is DOC, but when you look at the data, that is not true. It's not true. They've had 177 beds and they have not filled them. So again, I recognize the concern there, but I think that it is not a real true concern. The only other thing that I'll mention is exactly what Sabrina said. So when we look at the Essex Mental Health Care Facility, 40% of the overall cost of that facility was the mechanical systems, right? So the money, what is expensive here, is building out your core infrastructure, right? The actual beds, or the pods, if you will, are minimal in comparison to what we have to do for a base infrastructure, right, for a facility. And I do agree with the pro temp from last week, that if we build it too small, that's what my concern is. What happens when we build it too small? Then we're triple bunking in a room that's only meant for 2, or we're fitting up the gym, or we're sending the women out of state. And we're building less beds than what we have today, right? So it's 128 beds for general population, and then reduce it down by that 15%, right? That's what we're talking about. The 30 beds for reentry is in addition to that. It does get you to 158. but that's something they don't have today. We don't have reentry today, right? So that is an add-on, if you will, but you're still looking at 128 beds versus 177, which is what they have today.
And I do just want to mention how, so when our partners look at how they predict bed numbers, there's a formula they use. And in that, they look at things like growing population, things like that. So and they're looking at 50 years in the future, the facility's lasting 50 years. And so if our population continues to grow, we're talking about a lot more people in the state of Vermont than we have previously in the past. And so that's one of the things that's taken into account when our partnering firm determined that number, which they recommended at 194. So we are quite a bit below that.
And from the department's perspective, you know, as Sabrina said, this is a 50-year facility. 5 years ago, we had 157 women incarcerated. And so I think we have to be very careful about making decisions in the moment. It's just Senator Baruch's point, without thinking about some of the long-term consequences if we underbuild, because we will have to send women out of state or we will have to overcrowd that facility.
Or we will have to change laws so fewer people are incarcerated.
Absolutely, but and I, you know, to speak for the department, you know, that we are not, as I said last week, we're not agnostic to that, and that is incumbent on this committee and other policy committees within this building to do that work. But we have to plan for the worst possible scenario, otherwise women will languish.
And DOC was doing this study before I came in 2017. Look at how long it's taken to actually get us to the point where we're doing planning for facility, right? That's many years in the making. So any policy changes can be many years in the making as well.
Senator Sheehan and then Senator Walke and then Senator.
So I am still a little confused. So last week we looked at a slide that had 150 permanent beds and then these other non-permanent beds, but the 150 we just did included the non-permanent beds. So which is it? Is it 150, some of which are not permanent beds, or is it 185, some of which are not permanent beds?
You are right when you say 128 and 30.
Oh, yeah. So, you were like.
Last week, we were looking at a slide, and when I did the math on the slide, there were 185 beds represented. And when I asked about that, I was told that 35 of them were these non-housing beds. But when you just ran through the numbers, those non-housing beds are included in the 158. So I'm confused.
No. Sorry. I ran through them all, but the 158 is your permanent bed. Don't include the operational beds. I talked about them all together.
So the total number is actually 185.
If you're including your temporary beds, which includes your intake, your in-cap, which keep in mind, not all of the people that are in intake or in-cap end up in the facility. Some of them are discharged, as well as your assessment unit. And those are temporary beds as well, your infirmary and your flex housing beds. That includes your close custody, your acute mental health, your residential mental health as well, and your long-term medical, which are not considered permanent beds. In an ideal world, everyone is stable, healthy, and does not need special treatment. We know that's not true. But in your ideal world, you're with the general population.
We've been trying to figure out a way to make an analogy that's really easy to understand, and Kate and I talked about this morning, so she gets this, not me, in terms of, this is her idea, but hopefully this will resonate. So you have 2 seats here, right? You have one in this committee, and for some people, I know there are more than one committee, like the Senate's in 2 and House is in 1, but the point is, you have a chair in this committee, Damien's sitting in a chair, he doesn't count, he's not a member of the legislature, and you also have a chair in the Senate chamber, right? And the House has a chair in the House chamber. This, in theory, is your permanent seat, recognizing that you have a seat in the chambers as well. But think about that here when we talk about DOC, right? Imagine that they have a permanent chair here in this committee, permanent bed, right? But they have a temporary bed that they can go to when they need specialized needs. So for example, mental health care, right, is a good example. They're not going to be in the Senate chamber forever. This is their permanent home, right? So that's the difference when we talk about permanent beds versus temporary. They're going for a temporary need. So that space doesn't really count because we still need a bed. We still need a chair for you in your committee. Just like we still need a permanent bed for these people that are going for specialized treatment where it's short-term care, and then they're going to come back and they need a bed in the residential facility that's a permanent bed.
No, I appreciate that, and I understand the concept. What I'm having a hard time tracking is that the math seems to be presented in multiple different ways, that is what I'm having a hard time tracking.
And we're gonna give you a one page.
Yeah, we're gonna clear that out.
So we'll make it very clear to the committee.
And just with folks' awareness as well, we're currently at 127% of our male capacity.
Can I have a slide of this proposal with the various beds, please?
That's the one page, we're gonna provide that to you. We already talked about that when we left the
Okay,
committee room last
It,
time.
it would be helpful when we come back to this next week, that we have a slide that presents all the various beds and all the scenarios and why you're doing what you're doing.
There's also a legislative report that we submitted, which I can have Ben send around the call.
Okay, Senator Sheen.
Thank you. Let me know if I'm oversimplifying this, but the current facility, the Four Cs, has 177 beds, right? And can you remind me again, how much of that is general population?
That facility has very few specialty beds, because we didn't build them when that facility was built. It basically has a mental health unit, and it has a close custody.
Small infirmary, a few close custody.
Yeah, small infirmary, a few close custody, and some booking.
So,
And so right now, there's none of these mental, other than, there's no acute mental health beds, there's no long-term medical beds.
I understand that. I'm just wondering what the general pop number is for the 177.
I don't have that number off the top of my head. We can try to.
Okay, is it smaller or larger than what's being proposed?
We're proposing smaller for general population.
Okay, so as I'm understanding it, it seems like the proposal is for a smaller general pop amount of beds, but more beds for other areas like acute mental health issues, reentry, and some of the other.
Yes, that
right?
is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
How many women are in the, you may not know, into the lack of a better term, the public inebriate beds at Chittenden versus, I thought women went to Rutland too, if they were in public inebriates.
Yes, I don't know the answer. It fluctuates and is probably difficult to predict how many public inebriate beds or placements we have.
Well, I'm sure it's more on weekends, but could you, give us an estimate of that? I'm wondering if the short-term beds, I heard you say something about the public inebriate program. So I'm wondering the numbers that we're looking at in terms of public inebriate.
And Chair, we did cover that, I believe, in Joint Justice last year, and we talked about the Howard Center closing the.
Right, Howard Center closed and Franklin County one closed as well, right?
Right.
So we looked at that last year, but that was before this discussion of in here anyway, the women's prison, the new women's prison. I'm not sure how many actually women go to Chittenden. Do men go to Chittenden?
Men do not go to Chittenden. They would be
Even
transported
public
to-
inebriates don't go to Chittenden. So they go to Franklin.
Yeah, up to St. Albans.
So public inebriate in Burlington ends up at Franklin. Public, female public inebriate in Franklin, do they end up in Burlington?
Good question. I know sometimes folks are housed very shortly at a men's facility, until they can be transported to CRCS.
So I'd like to understand the short-term beds specifically and the assessment beds, 10 assessment beds. Those are really necessary, those numbers. They're borne out by.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Yeah, we bring in our subject matter, so I'm exactly what that is.
I didn't do a very good job of explaining that.
Well, the mental health bed's clear. That's probably you probably need more than 5. Given the fact that the corrections department is the institutional last resort. What we're seeing is a higher number of mental health cases as well as developmentally. borderline developmentally disabled cases, as well as people who are on detention accused of crimes while they're awaiting competency evaluations. We tend to spend a lot more time. All right, would those individuals who are on detention be in the specialty beds, or the specialty beds only for people with sentences?
No, I believe if you need one of the specialty beds, you would have access to it regardless of legal status.
So if a person who was awaiting a competency evaluation were to come in, and then we get Senator Mahal.
Of the 115 women that were housed at CRCF as of this morning, how many of them would qualify for reentry if we had that facility today?
Yes, I think we were talking about this with the women's stakeholder group last week, because we met regarding the proposed eligibility criteria that we developed with the stakeholder group. I believe it was between 22 and 28 individuals currently. And so if we look to, we'd have to kind of reevaluate if we were able to see that legislative change, statutory change.
Right, I recognize it.
Currently, I think up to 28 individuals.
Okay, which brings that general population down under, would bring it down under 100 if they had a reentry space to go. Does my question make sense?
I have to see it on paper, Senator. So
Okay.
math was never my strong suit.
Yes. But so I looked at the population today and it was 115. So if we
Yep.
take, say, we'll go mid-range, 25 of them out, brings us down to 90 in our general population, and then, 25 in reentry. So I think, part of the evaluation of numbers has to include the idea that some of the women currently housed in general population could be in reentry, therefore decreasing
Right.
the numbers.
So using your numbers, we have 90 left over, we have 80 medium minimum beds and 20 in honors. And so assuming there's no women in specialty beds, that leaves, basically 10 beds left over between the general population.
I'm looking forward to the one pager. My brain's, that's also not my strong suit. No, I totally appreciate that. I'm like trying to make a chart in my brain, which is not something that it's good at.
And certainly having the detention population makes everything much more complicated.
Yes.
I think we're only one of 6 states in the country that do that. And operationally, philosophically, because we also want the reentry facility to be successful. So we want folks to have a community, and so something we've been debating internally and discussing with the one stakeholder group is if you have people constantly churning through that facility, would that in any way kind of erode the ability for people to form community? It's one reason why we see actually folks prefer the out-of-state facility, because there's a social contract. Everyone there is sentenced. They have, kind of a self-elected form of government. It's a little more cohesive. The detainee population adds a lot of chaos into that environment.
And I appreciate that. I have thoughts on that too, but my follow-up to that, as we're thinking numbers, how many of those sort of remaining 90 women are in the honors unit now?
I think we
12.
12 folks, I think, are in the honors unit currently. And there's eligibility criteria for the honors unit. So for example, disciplinary action. Currently we have 500 folks in the detention population statewide as of this morning. For the women, we have 47 female state detainees and 14 federal female detainees. The remaining are sentenced folks.
And you said 12 honors?
12 honors.
Okay. Thank you.
So, I think we see the need for a chart for us to ask questions about, but I also think there's a need to discuss. Next week, we come back with recommendations for the institutions committee, but also recommendations for the miscellaneous corrections bill that will be coming to us today. I hope Senator Engels wants to. And I think there we can look at some policy, and my plan would be to hear from different groups, including the network, the Commission on Women, who want to, as well as maybe a half an hour with that group that wants nothing. Free her, and you can just tell them what they got, and we can can hear from whoever they want, but network and, is there anybody else we'd like to hear from besides, corrections and BGS, obviously?
Former Senator Debbie Ingram,
Yes,
who runs Vermont Interfaith.
somebody from Vermont Interfaith,
Yeah.
Debbie.
And this should be, is it next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday, yeah. Presumably we won't be on the floor for a long time.
And would this be going into miscellaneous? Or
That remains to be seen.
should I try and get Ben Nebugoski?
Ben would be the better person for that, yes.
Chair, we also, in the stakeholder group, we also have representation from the courts, from Judge Zone and Terry Corsos, as well as the state.
Good idea.
And they have their victims advocate is also in the state.
Have the general, the state attorneys, and the usual cast of characters. And so Damien would be the corrections, the institution portion. And Ben would be the corrections policy portion. You've already pretty much, we're just gonna put in 10th language.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll touch
And then
base.
this other language that you had.
So I'll get the updated intent language, and then a new draft to you for next Tuesday, it sounds like. And I will touch base with, corrections to see their documentation, so I can put together that intent language. So,
Sounds good. Are there other people that anybody?
Was the ACLU on that list?
What?
The ACLU,
Oh,
I think they're
gosh,
part of the
yeah.
stakeholders
Forgot
group as
about
well.
Yeah,
It's a big group.
Yeah.
About 40 folks. So.
yeah, they ACLU. It may be 20 minutes each, by the way.
Okay. Yeah.
The bigger it gets, the more. I think you're saying an awful lot in 20 minutes. How long will it take to build this?
So that's really gonna depend on both the administration and the legislature and revenues and all sorts of things we can't predict. This will be an expensive bill, there's no doubt about it, which means we're gonna need multiple years of funding, like through the capital bill, because that's typically where we get our funding through. In addition to that, we're gonna have to go through the permitting process, right? Citing a correctional facility is not an easy thing to do, and it takes us a while to work through that process. So my best guess on a timeline for all of you is 5 to 8 years to have something actually built.
And
And
we
that's
all,
assuming we get all the funding we need, it's assuming we can get through permitting, relatively unscathed, right? That is me giving you a fairly optimistic timeline.
that is concerning because I think everybody would admit the current facility has outlasted its useful life.
And we agree with you.
So what can we do to either speed it up or make sure we can do it within the lesser of 5 years? What is it the legislature can do to help to speed it up?
I have some ideas and thoughts on that, for sure. What I would like to be able to do though is to come back and give you a more comprehensive answer on that. But I definitely have some ideas on that. Part of it obviously is the funding piece. Because if we don't have enough money, we can't build it.
Right, so, it needs to be a priority over some things that I see in the Capitol bill, like, I don't know, I won't mention any particular fish hatchery.
We do, I do see additional pressures coming, right? We're talking about a forensics facility potentially, it's starting to be discussed anyway. So that would be another AHS facility. We're talking about the siting of a future DCF juvenile facility, right? So there's multiple AHS facilities on the horizon. There's also modular flood recovery. That is going to be a significant amount of money that we're going to need as match money. So there are other things in the so my point is, there's a lot of priorities, and you are right, as the administration and
Forensic
legislature.
facility is also another facility. that's a priority, at least on the Senate side.
Chair, I just want to thank you for that point, because I think it's oftentimes, it's forgotten, is that the longer we wait, the more folks who are in that facility will suffer. They will languish because it does not meet their needs.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
that's why whatever we can do to speed it up,
right. And
just make sure we meet the 5-year goal rather than the 10-year goal.
And I just wanted to say that includes obviously the women who are currently living in that facility, but also our staff who are working in that facility, the staff of the various contractors, community-based services, the Divas program, through the network, Lund, Kids Apart, Mercy Connections.
No, I'm fully aware of working in a facility that's, I never worked in a facility that had outlived its useful life, but certainly seen, Woodstock, we went through that in Woodstock, before you built Springfield.
So one of the things I most often say, and the biggest challenge that we'll have, and we have done multiple AHS facilities, so I can speak from experience, not in my backyard will be the biggest challenge we're gonna face. There's no doubt about it. And one of the ways in which you can all be supportive is to be good partners to us when we're trying to site a future facility, because we won't be able to do it alone. And depending on where this one is sited, we will need the representatives in that area to step up and support us in our efforts, right? Because they don't know Jennifer Fitch, right? But they know their local representatives. And that garners a lot of trust when we're partnering and we deliver a facility together. And considering the legislature also makes it a priority, right? And approves or denies funding, which is, where you're saying we support it or we don't. There has been global support, as far as I know, throughout the building for at least understanding that the current facility, to your point, is too old, right? And it no longer meets the current model that we want to move forward with. So I would say maybe not everybody's 100% on board with this facility, but most of the people I talk, when I walk around the building, are in support that we need something new. So if we can that is one big thing that would be very helpful, is to have the legislature stand behind us as we try to site a
I
facility.
can't promise 180 people, I can promise only myself that I would do that. But I have experience, but not in my backyard, because I have 3 group homes for juveniles in my backyard, literally. And I have never opposed it, and actually, over the years, I've only been disturbed once, and I think it was somebody from there that opened my back window, they got the dog barking and they left. But other than occasionally somebody runs away and the police are following. But I've seen it in my own hometown, right now on this eye care facility. I don't know if you're familiar with that, for individuals who may have come from corrections, mental health, substance abuse. It's a nursing home, and it's something that we've needed for a long time. But we have people who are opposing that, because it would be in their backyard. And I can't promise what 180 people might do. But I can remember suggesting a work camp back when they were popular for Bennington, and the select board went and voted against it immediately that night. Appeared in the paper and they brought it up and voted against it. And then Shaftesbury was nice enough, that's the next town to Bennington, was nice enough to say they'd take it. But it never materialized. Things changed, but there was a plan for a second work camp somewhere in southern Vermont. So it's an experience, and I don't know how various legislators look at it. But I'm gonna question one thing, is the Windsor facility. For all of the things, the former Windsor prison camp, and for all of the things that you've mentioned, it's right off the exit of the interstate. It has, I realize it might not have for the reentry, the services and et cetera, but certainly in terms of a juvenile facility, in terms of a forensic facility, and in terms of a women's facility, it could, if you can get the staff to work there. It's a nice location.
It's a beautiful location.
Plenty of land, room to grow food, whatever else. Could even have cows if you want.
It's absolutely gorgeous there. I 110% agree with you on that. And here's what I would say is the challenge with Windsor. So we do take that site into consideration often when we have a need. It's our understanding that the town manager for Springfield does not want, not Springfield, I'm sorry, for Windsor, does not want another AHS facility. And apparently their voice has been heard by the legislature. And so we have not unfortunately been able to do anything with citing anything, even on a temporary basis there, because we've gotten so much pushback from the town manager. So we do look at it as an asset for the state. It costs us $250,000 a year, because we still have to heat certain buildings, because we still have water on. And so we are spending money. We've actually asked to sell it twice, because if we can't use it, then we should sell it, and we've been denied twice. Again, my legislature not picking, I'm just letting you know what the history has been. And so now it's just kind of sitting there. We're doing our third study on it, because a lot of times when we don't know what to do with something, we're asked to do another study. So we're doing another study again. We've been working with ACCE to try to market that property. There's lots of amazing ideas for it, but the reality is that these developers continue to come to the state and ask for money for them to help develop that location. So it's just kind of swirling, is my whole point of telling you that story about Windsor, but we do look at it.
Talked to the Windsor County Senators, I know there's some, I don't know where they stand on that.
I think, if I'm remembering right, I think Allison supports developing it. But that's not answering the town manager question.
But then I would love to get authority to sell, and I'd love to be able to put it on the market.
Well, do we still own the property where the old week school was?
For Jens, yes, we do.
We still own the property where Brandon Training School was?
We sold up part of the parcel, but, Mr. Chairman, we still own a lot of land there.
So those are there's three that I'm just coming up with off the top of my head.
And for women's, just a little history, so for women's correctional and reentry, the language last year, which is in alignment with the administration, is to look at state-owned land, right? Because if you own it already, it's a good candidate for siting versus having to pay more money, right, to buy another parcel that we don't already own. So we are going through that study now. We have looked at both private and parcels that we own. And now Sabrina, in that part of the study, is working with HOK to vet the sites that we're down to in terms of final selection.
Isn't there one in Essex? Am I remembering that?
There are two in Essex.
Two in Essex.
Used to be a tree farm.
There is still a tree farm. Well, it's not a tree farm, it's soccer fields, but recreational space.
When I worked at Lakeside, we used to go to that and we used to work on the tree farm.
Yeah.
The kids. No, I didn't work on the tree farm. I supervised them working on the tree farm.
Now it's recreational space. There's lots of lovely youth
But now
soccer
it's a
going on.
soccer field. All right. Well,
But I will come back and answer your question, because there is one more thing that would be very helpful, but I want to make sure that I say it correctly.
well, I don't know how to deal with not in my backyard, but it's, I think current facility is not adequate. And the longer it stays open, the more disservice we do to the women that are incarcerated there. And the other thing is the reentry program for men. There needs to be one somewhere. Whether you maybe even call it halfway house and we'll get better support.
Maybe, I don't know.
All right, well, we'll come back to this next Tuesday, we hope.
And we'll make sure we get you that one pager that clearly out.
Yeah, well, I need to figure these numbers out, because I was trying to keep track of them in my head, and I don't add application for adding and subtracting. I tell people I got on appropriations because I flunked math. They immediately put me, when they heard that, they immediately put me on the appropriations.
I think we have more than one.
Yeah.
It's not my strong suit.
Well, that's,
She'll be over here, so you should
that's not fair.
Doing well?
That's not fair. And they kept pushing her back. And I've got the same demands as the health and welfare committee, so. No, we'll keep going. We got the bill? Aye.
I emailed you 2 days ago from the Department of Health. On H655, carve out for the emergency medical services licenses. Okay, I sent you a memo, I can resend you.
You should, I'm getting so much email, I'm losing
This
it.
stuff you're leaving or picking
So
up?
I should print it out.
Yeah, print it out today and I'll.
Well, I actually, I have it, I can print out a copy.
What's it do?
It's a memo about a carve out,
In a bill?
For the emergency.
for the bill that we're
medical
about to
services.
talk about.
Oh,
Okay.
it's for the licenses for EMS providers.
Oh, okay.
For the seal records.
Oh, okay, well, we've got it here then.
Perfect, and I'm here from the Department of Health if you have any questions.
Okay?
Okay, thank you.
I'll print out, copies of it right now.
Thank you so much.
Have I got the bill?
Or are you just handing it out now? I did not print out the memo, but I will do that right now. I'm monitoring show for speakers. There, Bruce, did I did give you yours, right?
You did.
And Michelle is held up in Austin welfare. They kept pushing her backwards. It's not my fault. You are?
Downstairs, Rose Kennedy.
Oh, hi Rose, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Good, you're in a new position.
Yeah, fairly new, 2 years.
Oh, great, it's not new anymore.
Not really.
Well, why don't we speed things up and, do you have testimony to provide on the carve-out?
I'm happy to review the memo with you.
Yeah, why don't we do that to start with, and then we'll, if Michelle isn't that, there she is, never mind. We'll schedule you at another point. Rose, are you following this bill for the Attorney
Yeah,
General?
it's by tomorrow, so just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Hi,
Okay,
sorry.
at 11:45, I have to do a sound check
Okay,
to be on VPR, but at 12:20 or 12:15, so I'm gonna just do that while you're moving on, and continuing your walkthrough.
You will
okay.
be chair.
Okay.
This is the,
All right, they gave
Oh,
me
thank you.
10 minutes to do a walkthrough of the amendment to OPCs.
Oh, nice.
Well, it's not that I'm ignoring all of you, it's just I'm doing something.
Okay.
Five, if you just have to check at 12:45, and then I gotta wait around for half an hour. Listen to this stuff.
Oh, thank you.
You let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Thank
I'm ready. Okay, so for the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel, and we're taking up H655, everyone's favorite topic, expungement and sealing of ministry records. This issue has, as you know, been kicking around for a number of years. I don't know, I'm trying to remember how long ago it was that you adopted this chapter, maybe about a dozen years ago. Chapter 230 in Title 13 on expungement and sealing, which the current law is a real hodgepodge of things over amendments, kind of piecemealed over a number of years. And the proposal before you, I think there's been a lot of interest in, on behalf of the General Assembly, to move to a simpler system, one that is a little easier to administer, but also one that is easier for pro se folks to be able to access and understand and look at using. So right now it's a combination of sealing and expungement. Remember, sealing means that it is essentially kind of cloistered off and not available to the public for inspection and copying. So it wouldn't be available on someone's public record. They couldn't go to the courthouse and get copies of that. But with sealed records, there is usually, there are individuals and entities that are afforded special permissions to view those sealed records for certain purposes with sealed records. And then with expungement, the record is actually destroyed, and so the record no longer exists. But in terms of the public-facing impact of that, it would be that there's no difference in terms of if somebody asked me on a job application or something like that, have you ever been convicted of a crime? If my record was expunged or sealed, I would be able to say no. And so it's really about kind of the public-facing issue.
Well, I take the point, and I think that's in large part right. Where we founded on this before was expungement promises somebody that the record is gone, and no one can use it against them, including prosecutors, including the state, including roadside stop cops. And that's where Senator Sears had what I thought was a great compromise, which was it was going to be sealed for everybody except people who went through the judicial process and got permission to look at it. But the administration wanted DCF and public safety and all these other groups to be able to access it.
Correct. And that's always been the rub with all of this, is the policy around if a record is not destroyed but sealed, how long is it sealed? Who has access to that sealed record, and for what purposes do they have access to that sealed record? And that's really where the tough parts have kind of come in on negotiation between in the legislature as well as between the legislature and the administration. So I know we have like we don't. I want to make sure Senator Sears hears most of this, but I know we'll be talking about it for a while. But I'm going to go kind of.
I'm only on for about 2 minutes.
I'm just going to go quickly this time because we're going to be talking about it so much, and we can really dig down into the language a little later. But just as like a general overview, if you look at section 1, and I'm amending the entire section, and there are a few statutes that aren't amended, but most are with the switch from expungement to sealing. So with regard to the definitions on 7601. You'll recall that when you're talking about sealing or expungement, there's this term qualifying crime, right? And then that's what criminal offenses are eligible either for sealing or expungement. Something that I just want to refresh your memory about is what is a criminal history record. So that term is used throughout here. That definition is pulled from Title 20. I'm just going to read it into the record. So criminal history record means all information documenting an individual's contact with the criminal justice system, including data regarding identification, arrest or citation, arraignment, judicial disposition, custody, and supervision. So it's the whole record, right? It's not just a record of convictions. So qualifying offense, what is done in this House proposal is, I think the easiest way, and you can look through those lists of what those particular, what's on the page with regard to qualifying crime, but I think it's easiest to think of it in terms of a qualifying crime under this proposal is all misdemeanors, except those that are listed starting on the bottom of page 3 and going to about the middle of page 5. So the default is that all misdemeanors would be eligible for sealing. Doesn't mean they're going to get sealed. You have to meet requirements. The court has to rule that they should be sealed. But the default is all misdemeanors would be eligible unless it's one of these offenses. So things like listed crimes, right? Something like a misdemeanor, child sexual exploitation, or failure to comply with sex offender registry, things like that. And so again, those just policy decisions for what you want to exclude from being eligible for sealing. And then
Quick question for page 5 and lines 7 through 9. So does that prohibit all motor vehicle offenses from being sealed or will that be discussed later on?
I think that'll be discussed, but this is something that was requested specifically by AOT because of federal CDL requirements. And I have to admit, I don't know a whole lot about that. They kind of came in at the tail end and said in order to be able to comply with federal law with CDL requirements, that there had to be certain things that were not taken off someone's record.
Yeah, I'm remembering we've had that in the past, that carve out for commercial driver's license.
So that was not something that, necessarily House Judiciary came up with and was proposing, but was something that DMV, or I guess DMV, not AOT, came in and said that they needed.
Thank you.
So just a quick overall question. Does this eliminate expungement entirely?
There are a few circumstances where expungement is available, like with 18 to 21-year-olds, but diversion, but otherwise, yes.
What about deferred sentences?
Those would be sealed.
I can't vote for a bill that does that, so just to know, take away that ability to defer a sentence and give the offender the ability to get a complete expungement is a current law, and it works. I've seen it work in so many cases. And youthful offender status, is that expunged?
No, that is keeping it as expungement. I'm sorry, yes, it is
Okay,
keeping it
so
as
that
expungement. That's not changed.
What, and juvenile records stay the same as they have it there?
Yes.
Okay, so the one place where I have a problem is deferred. I think it should stay as expunged, because I just don't. And because people do get a deferred sentence for crimes that are eligible in here. Right?
Correct. So the misdemeanors, all misdemeanors except this list. With regard to felonies, the rule would be no felonies except this list. Okay? And so if you look at page 5, starting on line 10, the following felonies. They are, and if you think of them just generally, it's primarily property-related felonies and drug-related felonies, but does not include any trafficking offenses, but it does include felony possession or selling. And so if you look at page 6, you'll see what is included starting on subdivision 5 on line 3, when I use the term designated property, felony property offense. And those are the property offenses that would be eligible.
Grave robbery.
Counterfeit paper money.
Get that seat.
I know, every time we dig out and say, well, what about this, what about this? You're like, wow, I didn't even know that was a crime.
Oh, I knew that was a crime. I was surprised we would seal it. Yeah, I have a feeling that's gonna take us down that road we were on with expanding the Big 12.
Well, you look at all the different ones, right?
Did they have a endless time in the house trying to?
I think that there has been so much work on this issue over the last, I've only been doing it for 3 years, because Bryn had done it prior to me picking it up. But I think it's just kind of built and evolved over a number of years. So I'm going to move on to page 14, where we start looking at the process in 7602 for sealing. So just some things to note about, I'm just going to hit some highlights, is that you know, this section is setting forth the process for someone to petition for sealing of a criminal issue record if either it's a qualifying crime or if the offense is no longer a crime. So you see on line 15, the petition, you can file a petition, the first one being the person was convicted for an offense which the underlying conduct is either no longer prohibited by law. So thinking about something like cannabis, like possession of a small amount of cannabis by someone 21 years of age or older, or if it's no longer a criminal offense. So sometimes, you know, you have something that's a misdemeanor and then you will turn that into a civil offense. And so something that goes to the Judicial Bureau and is no longer a crime, that would also fit under this particular provision and be eligible for sealing. So top of page 15, it would be eligible if the person was convicted of a qualifying crime. Subdivision 2 there is the issue of who is the respondent in the matter. So, so it would be whichever office prosecuted the original offense. So it could be a state's attorney's office or it could be the attorney general's office. So that's been something that's been debated back and forth about whether or not the first bite at the apple goes to the original prosecutor's office. But that original prosecutor's office could pass that on. So like if the state's attorney didn't want to deal with it and they wanted the AG's office to handle it, they agreed they could do that.
Michelle, can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
More of a general question, but if somebody wants to seal their record rather than having it expunged, but it's an expungible offense, can they choose to have it sealed instead?
Under the current law?
Current law or the proposed law?
Current law, I kind of have to go through and look at the little analysis in there, but that's interesting. I feel like I want to say no, but don't hold me to that. So let me take a little time to think about it. But I don't think the mechanics are set up, you know what I mean, to kind of give someone the option of that. What would be the reason for the petitioner to want something sealed as opposed to, wait, did you say?
Sealed, so let's say you have an offense that's expungible, but the petitioner says, you know, I don't want these records completely obliterated from existence, and so I prefer to seal them. And the rationale being that perhaps a couple of years down the road, they encounter an attorney and the attorney points out, hey, there was prosecutorial misconduct in this case, or your defense attorney was inadequate and didn't properly represent you, or this police officer who investigated the case is being charged with perjury and now you're.
I mean, I would think that, yeah, I don't know about whether or not, I can't really think of any mechanism to say, I don't want what the statute's providing me. I would like a less, you know, I'd like something different, but let me think about that.
Okay, yeah, it's something I'd like to revisit eventually.
I mean, I will say that this proposal, there's not much left that would be expunged. So it would be sealed. And as the person who is the subject of the record, you're always going to have access to that sealed information. So subdivision 3 here, still on page 15, is the court, if the parties stipulate to the sealing, then the court doesn't have to hold a hearing. So if everybody's in agreement, they don't need to hold a hearing. Subdivision 4 is, again, this related piece to this federal CDL requirement. Subsection B, this is, so there's kind of like...
Sorry, what page are you?
15, subsection B. So I'm about to start, there's essentially kind of 4 buckets, if you think about that things will fall into in terms of how you move forward on the petition for sealing. First one is offenses that are no longer prohibited by law or no longer criminal. The second one is qualifying misdemeanors. The third is qualifying felony offenses. And then the fourth is qualifying DUI misdemeanors. And there's little different requirements for that under each one of those. So the first one in subsection B, offenses that are no longer prohibited by law. And you'll see the requirements there are that the petitioner has completed any sentence or supervision for the offense. Top of page 16, any restitution, surcharges, those types of things have been paid. And those are the only two requirements. As long as those have been met, then the court is to grant the order for sealing of the record.
And these are things that are not currently crimes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
The next one is for qualifying misdemeanors. And so here, if you fit into that list, so remember, it's all misdemeanors except that list, you have to wait for at least 3 years since you've completed the terms of the sentence. So let's say it was a 2-year misdemeanor probationary sentence, right? So date of conviction was January 1st, 2020, and then you are finished in 2022, then you would have to wait until 2025, January, to be able to petition, right? So you following me on that? So, so you just have, because there's some math involved when we get in here. So you have to wait 3 years until you've completed the sentence, and then you've paid any restitution or surcharges. And then subdivision 3 is that the respondent, meaning the prosecutor, has failed to show that sealing would be contrary to the interests of justice. So it's a little different that sometimes you'll see, often in law, it'll say the court finds that doing something is in the interest of justice. This is kind of the opposite. It's the burden is on the prosecutor to show the court that sealing would not be in the public interest or in the interest of justice. Just a policy twist for you. So subsection D is qualifying felony offenses. Same formula, except you have to wait 7 years from the date of completion of the sentence. Okay?
And have all of your fines.
And have all your fines and everything paid. And again, the court would have to consider whether or not the prosecutor has shown that sealing would be contrary to the interests of justice. Then on page 17, when you get to subsection E, you have qualifying DUI misdemeanors. For that, it's 10 years from completion of the sentence, and then the same other terms, although, again, you'll see this addition on line 17 and 18 for the CDL stuff. So essentially, we're going 3, 7, 10.
How'd they pick 3?
I think that's been in previous versions. I'd have to look, but I think that was in the version that was recommended by Justice Oversight a few years ago.
Probably.
I mean, you'll recall, there was a lot of legislation that got to a certain point or was vetoed, and then Justice Oversight took it,
Yeah.
and then they recommended something, and then, so I think this is my starting point for this, although I barely remember it at this point, was the work that the legislature had done in previous sessions.
There's nothing in here that changes people who have already had their records expunged, right?
Correct.
Or sealed or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, no, you can do
None
that
of this
anyway.
would impact anybody.
Correct. Yep.
But just to return to what I said before, we did pass expungement.
Yeah.
And we did hold it out there as a thing for people, which we are now going back on. So that's why I've always thought, I was always tentatively in favor of this as a more efficient one-track system, but it seems to me that expungement, no one has your record. And then the sealing that's always proposed is everybody has your record except for the public. And to me, that seems a broken promise there, which is why I like.
I agree.
Yeah.
Why we haven't been able to
Right.
get it built. Senator Shane.
Just a quick comment on,
Yeah.
on that. I think that, if something's going to be sealed, it should only be for the person who sealed it, or their attorney. That's It's my opinion. I don't think it should be broadly accessible. I mean, the whole point of the sealing / expungement conversation is to reduce or ideally eliminate the collateral consequences if something is found to be within, you know, the guidelines that we're setting for something to be sealable or expungible.
I share the concerns voiced. I also have, regardless of what direction we move in, I've got really significant concerns with not fully expunging something that is no longer a crime. If I did it today, I wouldn't be charged with a crime, but now I hold a criminal record because I did it. Like, that feels, like, I agree that it feels like a broken promise if everyone has access to it. I, like, with everything said, but that one in particular just really stands out to me as absurd.
Yeah, especially marijuana crimes at this point, although I guess cannabis is mentioned in here explicitly.
Yes, and you should check back. A few years ago, y'all directed the court to be expunging, expunging those old ones that were no longer a crime.
But if we did this, that would stop, right?
No, I mean, we'd have to
we
see
can.
where they've gone on those misdemeanor ones. But this is broader, and this is
Yes,
allowing the sealing of.
Can you hear me?
Of crimes beyond that kind of 1 ounce
Something,
bit. So there would be not only misdemeanor cannabis, but felony cannabis that would be eligible for sealing now that don't fit into
I
that
can now,
other
yes.
one.
Can you hear me?
And hopefully by now, that automatic sealing of all those
Yeah,
old
that'll be gone.
ounce or less
We're
cannabis
still in our
ones has
meeting
been
until
completed, but I
noon
don't
time.
know whatever happened
But we'll
because
be
you guys
done,
directed the
and,
court to do that, like,
Eliminate the
I think
background.
in 2020 when you did the big cannabis bill, and then there was COVID, and I just don't know.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I mean, is I don't know where they are, if that's been completed or not, but you can ask Judge Zonay on that. So 7603,
Thank you.
so this one I'm just gonna kind of summarize. So unless either party objects, in the interest of justice, the court is to order sealing of a criminal history record related to the citation or arrest of a person if the petitioner and respondent stipulate to the sealing, or within 60 days after the final disposition of the case in the following circumstances. 1, the court doesn't make a determination of probable cause at the time of arraignment. 2, the charge is dismissed before trial, either with or without prejudice. So when you say something's dismissed with prejudice, it means that can't be brought back. If it's without prejudice, it's still kind of a live issue. And then 3, the defendant is acquitted of the charges. So if a party objects to sealing of the record, the court schedules a hearing to determine if sealing the record serves the interests of justice. (7604) on a new charge. This is changing it. Let's see. Oh, this was the issue of, and I think this actually, although you may not want it to be, but I think actually this house wanted this to be sealing. I think that's something that they brought up after it was already out on the floor. But this is on a new charge. And the way that the language reads now is that if a person's charged with an offense after they filed for a petition, it says that the court is not to act on the petition until they dispose of the new charge. But what if they have one pending at the time the petition is filed? So it doesn't come after they filed the petition, but it's pending. And so that's just kind of trying to close that loophole there. 7605, it's that if a petition for sealing is denied, or expungement or sealing is denied, the person has to wait 2 years before filing again. 7607 is that except for certain circumstances where entities are granted access to sealed records, the sealing order is effective immediately, and the person is to be treated in all respects as if they were never arrested, convicted, or sentenced.
So this says effective expungement. Is that where you were?
Yes.
Um,
Sorry, I just skipped to, I just skipped to 7607 in my brain,
Page 23.
which is sealing, effective sealing.
where is that?
23.
The 7607, yeah.
So page 23. Did you have a question on expungement?
No, I
or
just was confused where we were.
Sorry.
That's okay.
On page 23, 7607A, this is just A is just kind of the process for sending the sealing order to the various entities that hold the records. Subsection B, it continues on to page 24, is just what the effect of that order is, which we've already touched on. And then here's the real part I think that you're very interested in, which is C, and these are the exceptions that Senator Booth was talking about. So I'm just going to read some of the intro language, which is that a party seeking to use a sealed criminal history record in court proceeding prior to any use of the record in open court, because these are going to be able to be used by criminal justice agencies for criminal justice purposes and in all kinds of other circumstances. So if there was a sealed record that someone had access to and they want to use it in open court, or in a public filing, they have to notify the court of the party's intent to do so. And then the court has to determine whether the record can be used prior to its disclosure in the proceeding. So basically they would be looking at the rules of evidence and kind of, making their analysis whether or not that evidence can come in and then be public.
So I think I know the answer if it's a prosecutor or someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can a private individual, it says in a court proceeding, in divorce court, in relief from abuse, is there?
Those folks aren't going to have access to,
Well, let's say that they know the person has a sealed criminal history, and then is there, this seems to include everybody when it says.
well, you have to read it in concert with
Yeah.
the people who have access to the record. So if you don't have access to the record, then you wouldn't
So
be
no
able to
private
bring-
individual
Correct.
could bring it up in any court proceeding.
Right.
Okay.
But there are things beyond, like a prosecutor, although, I don't know, maybe OPR are prosecutors, but like if unlicensing decision, it could be something on a licensing decision or something like that.
See, this is where I really have trouble with this. Getting rid of expungement, and then what this lays out is even includes OPR, like, so, you want to go into a profession and OPR has access to your sealed records. It's like, if they were expunged,
What was the point? Yeah.
you'd get the job, or you'd be able to be licensed, but your life is still held in check by the sealed record.
So I'm just, so we can get through it, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
skip down to, I just want to note
But
that,
this is the key area. We
Right, is
should
that-
identify this,
is
the
that-
exceptions is the key
right,
area.
is that when,
Was this an agreement with the House and the administration? You know,
I can't speak for the administration, I don't know, they certainly testified on it at certain points, or various
so
agencies.
I guess that's the question, is this something that you don't read it? So I'll need to find out.
You'll
from
have
the
to ask them.
I will have to ask.
I just want to note, the language is at the top of page 25, is that when a record is sealed, it's sealed forever, but you'll see the language at the top of page 25 says that when you are granting certain individuals and entities access to look at those records and use them, that's only going to be for a period of 10 years. So there is a stop point at which they will no longer have that access.
If you were convicted of a misdemeanor, and you'd have 3 years before you can even apply for the.
Right, 3 years.
For the sealing.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it's sealed, public safety and other agencies will have access for it for another 10 years.
Correct. So if you had a 2-year
So you're going
misdemeanor plus the
13 years.
plus the So it's 2 years. So let's say you had a 2-year probation sentence.
Mhm.
So from the date of conviction, you go 2 years, then you go 3 years, then you go 10 years. So they would have access to that misdemeanor for 15 years.
And then what happens?
And then they wouldn't have access any longer.
But the record still remains.
The record still remains, and the person who is the subject of the record could still access that sealed record, as well as I think there's the ability for research. But let me get down to the good stuff for you guys, because I think this is where everybody's thinking about. So, so subdivision 1, starting on line 4, just like I spoke. So if you're the subject, then you can continue to use it. Or no, I'm sorry, that one is on litigation. So if you have, if agency's being sued, they need to use it for litigation purposes and defense. They are entitled to do that. Subdivision 2, this is one of the sticky ones over the years. Criminal Justice Agency and the Attorney General can use that criminal history record for criminal justice purposes. Criminal justice purposes. I can give you the definition, but I don't have it right here. But it's.
Is the criminal justice agency a law enforcement agency?
It's beyond that. It's like, I think, I look at the definition. It has to do if you expend, I think, 50% or more of your resources on criminal justice.
And
but I can get it for you.
Would that include roadside stops?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, some think it is, and some think it isn't, so.
This one thinks it is.
That's good. Duly noted.
So 3 is with regard to DUI, if you need to use it for like a predicate offense. So if it's, if you need to determine whether or not it's a DUI 1 or it's a DUI 2, then you could look to see whether there's a predicate DUI offense.
That never gets, is that alive forever, or is it just 10 years?
So for sealing a DUI 1, you would wait like your 2 years on the misdemeanor. Then you would have to wait 10 years to be able to petition. Then if they granted the petition, then they could have access for another 10 years. So it would be 22 years from the date of conviction for DUI 1 that law enforcement could continue to look at it. So subdivision 4, so a person or court in possession of an order issued by a court regarding a matter that was subsequently sealed can file or cite to that decision in a subsequent proceeding as long as they redact certain identifying information. Subdivision 5 is VCIC and FBI would have access without limitation for responding to queries around firearms.
Mm-hmm.
Subdivision 6 is state's attorney and AG can disclose information when required to meet their discovery obligations. Subdivision 7 is that if you are the subject of the record and then also your attorney, you can access that sealed record, and the 10-year limit doesn't apply to you. Subdivision 8, law enforcement agency can look at sealed records of anyone who is applying for a job with a law enforcement agency. Or they can look at it if they're doing an internal investigation into an employee. Subdivision 9 is folks who are doing research. They would have access to those sealed records, and again, the 10-year limitation would not apply to them.
What research is there that's under 20 VSA 2056?
I'd have to go look. I don't recall, but I think that's the section in VCIC chapter relating to research entities kind of doing de-identified kind of aggregate information.
I have a quick question, Michelle. We say like number 8, line 10, a law enforcement agency may inspect and receive copies of the sealed criminal records that's a bit of a stretch, okay? I think that for background purposes, if I'm doing a background on an individual, prospective employee, I should be able to call whatever and say, do they have a criminal record, period. I don't need to physically inspect these records. I don't think that, I agree in some part that we need to limit access to these records, obviously. This is becoming a circus, to be quite honest, so.
Especially if we're talking about what does received copies mean?
Yeah.
That's,
Is that
kind of stock language that we use for public records.
So it could be just an email.
I'd have
Right.
to talk to Tucker or Grady about how I don't know much about that.
So I think we should adjourn. I just want to mention tomorrow morning, I need to end at 11:45. I have my hospital's coming in here for a meeting with the local delegation, which should be fascinating. So you may want to clean off your desk tomorrow after.